This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
The traditional Hollywood assault against circled wagon trains or enclosed forts, in fact none of Arizona's territorial posts was completely walled, rarely if ever occurred. It was too dangerous and too risky. An Apache valued his life just as much as any white man. He wasn't recklessly brave. In this he differed from the Plains Indian, whose society encouraged the counting of coup on live enemies. An Apache admired stealth. He wanted to dispatch of his foes as quickly as possible without risk to himself. Of course, there was some hard skirmishing at times, but usually little loss of life, which is easily explained when one understands the nature of an Apache fight. General George Crook pointed out that in most Apache fights, a hostile was rarely seen. All you saw were puffs of smoke from the rocks. You rarely saw an enemy. This was the case in many of Cochise's fights, but in other ways he was an atypical Apache, especially in the early years of his war when he was the aggressor and fought for revenge. He showed no mercy to his enemies who, if captured, were tortured to death in a slow, painful, and inhumane way. Cochise's survival skills were legendary. For 12 years he successfully eluded troops and volunteers from 4 states and 2 countries. His allies were his ancestral mountains and the territorial boundary line, which he used adroitly, leapfrogging back and forth when heavily pressured. His rancherías were almost impossible to surprise, although it was done from time to time. His camps were strategically located in areas which could be defended easily and which offered a haven for safe retreat. His camp overlooking the San Pedro Valley on the slopes of the West Dragoons was a fine example, for if they were threatened, the Indians could easily move higher into the mountains. Sladen marveled at its location. Troops must have come up in plain view for some miles, and they could easily have been repulsed in any attempt to climb the steep face of the mountains below us, while the scattered rocks and boulders gave ready shelter to the Indians above. The path above us would have afforded a passage to shelter to the women and children on the other side of the mountain, or if necessary, our entire party could have safely retreated over the ridge onto the other slope of the mountain. Cochise continued such precautions even after he made his final treaty, thereby revealing that he never completely trusted Americans because of the Bascom affair. To Cochise's survival skills must be added one more factor: luck. Perhaps it was the element the Apaches called power, of which Cochise had his share. Asa Daklugi referred to it, but the way in which it related to Cochise is somewhat ambiguous. Not being Apache, I would be the first to admit that I do not fully comprehend its concept and significance. To me, the extraordinary thing about Cochise's life was the fact that he was at war with either Mexico or the United States for much of 40 years, was involved in countless raids, skirmishes, and fights, was surprised and attacked in his camp on occasion, was wounded several times, and allegedly was killed on a dozen occasions, give or take a few. Yet he survived, which was a testament to his stubborn persistence in the face of white subjugation. Finally, he accepted the hard reality that peace was his only option, and succeeded in obtaining a reservation in his country where he died a natural death. Was it fate, luck, or power? Who knows? There was little middle ground among Southwesterners regarding the Apaches during the last half of the 19th century. Many had lost family members or friends to an Apache arrow or bullet. Typical of this dichotomy in perception was a government survey conducted by 2 Arizona pioneers, both very familiar with Cochise's people. Sidney DeLong, post-settler at Fort Bowie and an Anglo who subscribed to the extermination policy as the panacea for the Apache problem, described the Chiricahuas as savages with all their vices, intractable, treacherous, not truthful, dishonest, not hospitable, cowards. Chiricahua Apache agent Tom Jeffords, who had a unique friendship with Cochise, described the Indians as gentle, docile, truthful, honest, hospitable, chaste, courageous. By Apache standards, Jeffords' views were on the mark. Most whites, however, were not familiar with Cochise's people and would have endorsed DeLong's opinion. I have tried to portray Cochise as a leader of unusual ability and influence, who played a leading role in the tumultuous period of Chiricahua Apache history between 1830 and 1874. On the whole, he seems to have performed better than any other Apache.